This is RACEX, a TPP review of race and race relations in America. Not everything is about race, but when race matters to the story, we're going to talk about it honestly, examine the facts, and challenge the narrative.
I wake up in the morning and I thank my God. Many people wish me down, but I still stand strong.
Hello. This is our first episode of RACEX. Can somebody show me the story where a 18-year-old boy went out for the day with a group of black friends? Every one of those black friends made it back, but the white boy never did. And America was told not to look too hard at the people who came back. Because that is the question I want to talk about today. And before somebody gets excited and starts typing, black people kill white people too, save it. I know that they do. Okay? Everybody knows that. That is not the question I asked. I'm talking about circumstance. I want somebody to show me the comparable story. A young white male leaves home expecting to spend the day with a group of black friends, right? Something happens during that trip. Everybody else comes back. He does not. His family is left trying to figure out what happened. And instead of people who were with him facing enormous public scrutiny, everybody starts explaining why we shouldn't look too closely at these young black boys. Show me the story. Because I went looking for that kind of story, and I haven't found a well-documented case that clearly matches those circumstances at all. Now, that does not mean it has never happened. There are millions of criminal cases in this country every day, and I'm not foolish enough to claim that because I couldn't find something, it never existed. But here's what interests me. I shouldn't have to find a perfectly reversed case to ask whether our reaction would be different if the races were reversed. That is what RACEX is about. When Nolan Wells disappeared after going to Horn Island with a group of young people, including white friends, the question wasn't automatically who murdered Nolan. We don't know that Nolan was murdered. I have said that repeatedly, and I'm going to keep saying it because facts matter even when speculation gets clicks. The question is much simpler. What happened to Nolan Wells? And why does asking hard questions about the people who were with him make some people so uncomfortable? If Nolan had been white and everybody who came back from the trip had been black, you honestly believe America would have handled the public conversation exactly the same way? I don't. And I'm a 6-year-old woman. I've been watching how race works in this country for a very long time. That doesn't make me an expert on every criminal investigation in America, but it does mean I know enough history and have seen enough history to recognize when something deserves a closer look. Imagine the headlines. White teen goes to island with black friends and never comes home. You think social media would be telling everybody don't speculate? Y'all need to stop it. Every photograph of those black boys would be online before breakfast. Somebody would have found their middle school Facebook posts by lunch. Their parents would be identified. Girlfriend would be interviewed. Their old teachers would be contacted. Somebody's cousin would be on TikTok explaining the way to 7th grade education. And cable television, Lord help y'all. We would have panels asking what these black boys knew, who knew it, when they knew it, who saw the white boy last, what his clothes was like, what his belongings were, what everybody was wearing, what everybody said after, and whether every single statement matched. And you know what? Some of those questions would be legitimate. That's the part people keep missing. I'm not arguing that black people should receive special treatment. I'm arguing that black families deserve the same level of concern that America would demand of a white family. There's a difference. I don't want black suspects railroaded. I don't want white suspects railroaded. I don't want anybody convicted because Twitter decided they look suspicious. I want consistency. If you would demand answers for a white mother whose son left with black friends and never came home, then don't suddenly discover patience, restraint, and the presumption that everything probably has an innocent explanation when the missing child is black. That's where I have a problem. And whenever we start talking about racial differences and how cases are perceived, somebody inevitably says black people commit crimes against white people too. Okay, and so what exactly does that prove? If I'm talking about whether one particular black family's questions are receiving adequate attention, telling me that some unrelated black person committed a crime against a white person somewhere else doesn't answer anything. That's not an argument. That's changing the subject. We can acknowledge racism committed by black people. We can acknowledge interracial crime in every direction. We can acknowledge that horrible people come in every shade humanity managed to manufacture. And after acknowledging all of that, my question is still sitting right here waiting for an answer. Would America react the same way if Nolan Wells were white and his friends who returned were black? Because I don't believe it would have. And I'm not basing that simply on emotion. We have decades of discussion and research concerning racial disparities in media coverage, perceptions of victims and amount of public attention different missing person cases received. That doesn't mean every white victim gets attention or every black victim gets ignored. Reality isn't not that neat, but patterns do have to have. But patterns do happen to have. Wait a minute. But patterns don't happen every single time to exist. They don't have to have. Jesus, I'm tongue tied. Patterns don't have to happen every day for them to exist. I'm trying to say. That's another argument that drives me crazy. You point out a racial pattern and somebody finds one exception and acts like they just cracked the case. Well, here's a black person who got national attention, quote unquote. Okay, and then I can show you somebody who smoked cigarettes in 1995. That don't mean cigarettes became vitamins. An exception doesn't erase a pattern. And Nolan's case doesn't require me to know who caused his death to ask whether race affects how people respond to the unanswered questions. Those are separate issues. Maybe Nolan's death ultimately turns out to have been a tragic accident. Okay. If the evidence establishes that fact, then that's where the evidence takes us. Maybe investigators eventually provide an explanation that answers every major question his family has raised. Then we deal with those facts. But you don't get to tell people to stop asking questions simply because you don't like where those questions might lead. You definitely don't get to turn the conversation into why are you accusing white people? I'm not accusing white people of anything. I'm examining a situation involving specific people. Their race becomes relevant when I ask whether our reaction to those exact circumstances would change if the races were different. That's the experiment. Take Nolan out of the picture for 30 seconds. White boy, 18. He leaves with several black friends for a day on an island. They return. He doesn't. Now picture those black boys arriving home without him. Picture his mother asking where her son is. Picture the television covers. Picture the comments under those stories. Picture what people would immediately assume about those black boys. And then tell me with a straight face that race wouldn't enter the conversation. That is why this conversation belongs on my channel. Not because I can prove that racism caused Nolan's death. I can't. Not because I can prove his friends killed him. I can't. It belongs here because race can affect what happens after something happens too. Who gets believed, doubted, scrutinized? Who gets protection? Whose family gets called grieving parents? And whose family gets treated like they're causing trouble because they keep asking questions? That is where racial bias can show itself without anybody ever using a racial slur. And sometimes that's the hardest kind of talk about. Sometimes that's the hardest kind of talk about because everybody wants racism to arrive wearing a name tag. Most of the time it doesn't. Sometimes it's simply a difference in reaction, a difference in suspicion and urgency, and a difference in whose unanswered questions get bothered by. And that is why I keep coming back to this hypothetical white boy. I want you to imagine his mother. Her 18-year-old son leaves home with a group of black people. Everybody comes home except him. Everybody comes home. His belongings come back. He doesn't. Days pass. His body is recovered. There are questions about what happened during those hours. Now tell that white mother, stop asking no damn questions. Those boys haven't been charged with anything. You're making this racial, mama. Tell her she needs to stay quiet while everybody else gets to get back to their lives. How well do you think that would go over? That mother would be all over United States television. Frankly, if there were unanswered questions, she would have every right to be. That's my whole fucking point. I want the same energy for Nolan's mother. I don't want anybody else falsely accused. I don't want evidence impended. I don't want rumors presented as facts. But I absolutely want every reasonable question answered that she has. Who saw Nolan last? When? What happened during the relevant period? What did everyone who was there say? Do those accounts agree with the physical evidence in the timeline? Those aren't racial questions. Those are investigative questions. Race enters my discussion when I ask why people become so offended that we're asking them. And if the answer is, well, you shouldn't suspect people without evidence, I agree. Suspicion is not guilt. Questions are not convictions. Investigation is not persecution. Those distinctions apparently become complicated somewhere between Facebook and TikTok, where everybody either has to be completely innocent or headed to the death chamber by Thursday. Real investigations don't work that way. You ask questions precisely because you don't know what happened. And I'm tired of the idea that asking questions about a case involving white people automatically means a black person is playing the race card. No. Sometimes we're checking the race card you've already been playing without noticing it. Would you respond the same way? Would you demand the same evidence? Would you extend the same benefit of the doubt? Would you have the same patience? Would you protect those black boys from public speculation as fiercely as you protect those white boys? That's the test. And I don't think America passes nearly as often as we'd like to tell ourselves. So I'm still looking. Show me the comparable case. Show me the 18-year-old white boy who went away with a group of black boys and never came home. That's the same unresolved circumstance that we find ourselves in with Nolan Wells. And if somebody finds one, I'm not going to run from it. I want to see how the case was handled. I want to see how his friends were handled. I want to see how the media covered them. I want to see how law enforcement talked about them. I want to see what the public assumed before the evidence was complete. Because that would actually tell us something. Until then, I'm not going to pretend that saying black people commit crimes too answers the question. It doesn't. Question ain't whether black people are capable of doing terrible things. Human beings settled that question several thousand years ago. The question is whether we judge the same circumstances the same way when the races change. And it's simply reversing the races makes if simply reversing the races makes the story feel more suspicious to you, more frightening to you, or more deserving of investigation, then maybe the thing we need to examine ain't Nolan Wells. Maybe we need to examine why changing the color of the people in the story changes the story inside your head. Okay? And that's the truth for a lot of y'all. This is my first episode of RACEX. Appreciate you coming.
Yeah.